Already see them. Volodymyr, don't steal our guests. You have had your panel already. Let all the guys to participate. Let me introduce you. Rebecca Harms, a German politician, member of the European Parliament 2004-2019, and the president of the Green Group 2009-16. Yevhen Hlibovytskyi. I don't think that anyone needs to introduce Yevhen Hlibovytskyi in Lviv. But for those who watch our discussion from via Facebook, Yevhen Hlibovytskyi is the founder of pro.mova consultant agency, is one of the co-founder of Nestor Expert Group. І якщо чесно, це ця людина, завдяки якої я розмовляю українською, тому що коли я приїхав в 15-му році до Києва працювати, то Євген був першим і єдиним, хто наважився зі мною говорити українською, а вона була в мене дуже повільна, і мені треба було багато часу. And Pavlo Klimkin, who is a very special person, and who need to be greeted as a foreign minister of Ukraine in 2014 until 2019, during the first Russian invasion and extremely complicated time. He served as a diplomat even before. He worked for Ukrainian Foreign Ministry since 1993, and he was already an ambassador of Ukraine to Germany during Euromaidan, and I remember his voice during the terrible months of, or the weeks and days of shooting on Maidan. Thank you for being here. So when we speak today about the discussion which was named by the organizers as Never Again, How to Win Peace, Not War, and Never Again is something, the slogan, which I know mostly out of the German post-war discussion, and that was always a call for not repeating the terrible dictatorship of the Nazis, and to secure peace and don't slide back to moving of the borders, to acquiring neighbor lands, to annexing. That is something what the German federal president von Weizsäcker said in 1985 while addressing the anniversary of end of war in Europe, when he said the idea of Europe is to make the life that way that we don't move borders but deprive the borders of their dividing characters. And that is what back then in 1985 we believed in Europe, that it is the way to protect the peace, to make the borders obsolete. But now we know that borders, as Francisca Davis said before, the borders protect freedom and human lives and human rights. That is why my first question is for Pavlo Klimkin. Can we hope that Never Again is real, and that after this war, after Ukraine wins this war, we'll have a stable peace?
Good evening, everybody. Good to be in such a crowd. We always have to hold out our hopes. It's really human. The point is that we can't live under previous reality, because previous reality is not sustainable, is prone to be blown off by evil players or by other players. And when I talk to students, I normally come up with a sort of famous joke about Einstein, who had exam in physics many, many years ago and distributed different tasks. And one of the students raised his hand, wavering, and said, "But professor, these are the same tasks you gave us 2 years ago." And Einstein said, "But it's fine. The answers are different." Either we understand that the answers are different, and I mean not just us Ukrainians, it should be also about the West, and it's the same way it should be about the non-Western world. Just the idea that the West should draw lessons from this war is fundamentally not enough. It's really my point. It's over. The second point is that at least our allies and our friends should get serious about understanding our rivals and enemies. And my point, does the West understand Russia now? Or at least is trying to understand Russia in a real way? And I don't have an answer to that. The best example is now quite famous Kissinger interview in The Economist, where he once said about China, you know, guys, China is kind of Confucian reality. He's been bashed by many Chinese scholars saying, guys, Qin Empire or Tang Empire is something Confucian, but now China is a mixture of nationalism and Communist Party control. It's fundamentally different. But Kissinger is 100 years old, actually after tomorrow, spent 75 years on international relations, and basically after all years dealing with China, he's fine in dealing with China, not understanding China. He said even something more mind-blowing on Russia. He said, yeah, guys, Putin is a kind of Dostoevsky hero. Some of my friends called me and said, Pavlo, you know, you read Dostoevsky, now you should explain us. What about Dostoevsky? What about Putin? What is the connection? But the point here is the whole capacity and experience of criminology had been lost, and nothing new in really trying to understand something which fundamentally differs from our set of values is coming, but how to understand it, how to feel in a way, how to feel it from inside is not there. And considerable part of the non-Western world is intrinsically, at the subconscious level, anti-Western and anti-American. And if you ask people, what is really a problem about the West, they said, yeah, Pavlo, maybe the West is good and many people would love to live in the West. But for us, it's about clear idea that if you work with the West, their enemies are our enemies, but not the other way around. Of the famous point by the Indian foreign minister, our problem is not yours, but your problem is ours. So we can't live under current reality. It's all clear that we can't have the same security model in Europe, in the world. It should be all blown off. But on the top of that, it's my last point, no worry, just for this chat. The whole approach, I mean not a strategy, kind of Western approach towards Russia could be boiled down to two simple points. It's deterrence. What kind of deterrence, nobody knows, because there is no strategy for that. And decoupling. But decoupling is a kind of selective isolation. What sort of decoupling is needed to do never again? Nobody knows. The serious conversation has started, but just now. And the span about approaches is 180%. And the next point is how to deter Russia. So fundamentally, what is the sense of new strategic deterrence? And there is a real risk now, and I mean real risk, that us, Ukrainians and Ukraine, will be not just perceived, but put in a position to be a sort of deterrence mode, in spite of a real deterrence strategy. Of course, not just ourselves, but the whole eastern flank of NATO. But my point is if the answers are different, or we will have it again. If we have just deterrence approach, my personal gut feeling here, and unfortunately I was right on a number of points here, it's at least 50% probability that we're going to have it again, point.
That is a very deep and to a certain extent scary analysis with a lot of reasons to be that scary. Thank you for this assessment. Before we come back, because I think this question is extremely important. Also, what you said about Kissinger, and not only him. There are a lot of voices in the West who are preaching some sort of throwing Ukraine on the bus. We know that recently in Germany, one of the most important theologians, Choven, literally named the Ukrainian army actions on the front line as the prolongation of the actions of German Wehrmacht in the World War II, because Ukrainian army brings suffering and killing there, as he said, and that is what the German Wehrmacht did. So please, President Zelensky, stop this war, stop fighting. That was for me a shocking video when I watched this announcement. But my next question goes to Yevhen Hlibovytskyi. You were one of the signatories of the call, if I'm not mistaken, about the sustainable peace. And this is what actually now what disturbs many people here in Ukraine, what I see, like how should Ukraine organize its life after the war, and what will be the role of Ukraine, and what will be the role of the West? And should Ukraine be concentrated on partner relations with the West to organize its life, or should it more concentrated on the own approach and own powers? Where is the golden balance in this vision of the future, and what is the vision of the future?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think the response is all of the above. And I think it's going to be manually fine-tuned until we find the new equilibrium. And it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of skill on behalf of the political leadership, which Ukrainians, as you know, are never too confident about. I think we are, to a significant extent, further and further in the uncharted waters. And what amazes me is that not even the capacity to be prescriptive, that is extremely limited on behalf of every player, both Ukrainian and international, but even on the ability of being descriptive. Very often the players themselves are failing. When Bill Clinton came out and said that, okay, I got it, it was a mistake to take the nuclear arms away from the Ukrainians, what it signals to me is that he still doesn't understand anything. It wasn't a mistake to take nuclear arms away from Ukrainians because it's a curse. If you have nuclear arms, your social transformation changes dramatically. And if you don't have strong institutions, you're always tempted to take a shortcut. But the mistake was to leave the nukes with the Russians. That was the big mistake. And it's still not on the agenda. So we're not in a situation where the reflection is deep enough. We're not in a situation when we actually are on terms with the existing situation on the ground. Every time I talk to colleagues from think tanks or politicians in Washington, D.C. or in Berlin or elsewhere, I feel that we have different pictures of reality. And these pictures are not necessarily synchronized well enough. And I don't want to only blame the West, even though I believe that the West should have had a better capacity to be better equipped to deal with issues like that. But I think Ukraine has to do a lot of homework as well. We have to, and especially considering that this is a media forum, we have to learn to say exactly what we mean. We have to learn to express ourselves. We have to learn to ask the right questions. We have to learn to see the big picture, which we very often fail. And as a result, we wake up in a Groundhog Day. Every day is the same, and we ask the same questions, and we don't see the difference. And that's the problem. I think, speaking of Sustainable Peace Manifesto, I think it's a tough sell. It has, in my opinion, an impressive list of authors. Some are, sound good, with good standing scholars. Some are politicians, some have experience in government. But I think a lot of people that I sent the link to the Sustainable Peace Manifesto in the West were utterly unimpressed with the document, because they expected that there would be kind of a quick fix, that it would be easier. And I think it didn't happen, because what basically the document says is, it says it's going to be a tough sell, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be messy. We will have to deal with Russia beyond this war. We will have to face the consequences that extend far beyond the battlefield. And this is not something that the societies want to hear. This is not something that the vulnerable administrations want to hear in countries where they face re-elections. This is not something that is comfortable this is not a comfortable reality that one has to face. And I am very much afraid that the result of non-decision making or decision non-making will be that we might, by accident, without intention, end up in a situation when the war is prolonged, longer than it has to, and then it will have cultural effects. And these cultural effects can be terrible. We are, in a given point, probably in the best, most benevolent state of the Ukrainian society that wants to be a player in good faith with the European integration. Every extra month and a year of the war will dissolve the centrist political ground in Ukraine, will radicalize the voters, will push them further to the extreme, and will give less chances for Euro integration to be a healing process that would actually allow the society to be the best version of itself. And I'm afraid that until we synchronize our visions between different capitals and between different parts of the Ukrainian political spectrum, we run extreme risk of producing two different answers to the same questions.
Thank you, Yevhen. Before I address Rebecca with my next question, I just wanted to catch a bit like your last idea. When you say that there are risks, I understand that, of course, every war is a huge stress. People are dying, people are suffering, economy doesn't work as it should, and therefore there appear the risk of radicalization and the separation of several groups in society. But if we address the dilemma as a dilemma to win war or win peace, isn't it a contradiction in itself, as the Ukrainian society is now winning the war exactly because it has won peace already before the war, because the Ukrainian society is more modern, is more united, because of the networks, because of creativity, because of the horizontal links? Is not the success of the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian society now during the war, isn't it a proof that Ukraine is capable to win the peace?
Well, I'm afraid that the criteria along which the decision is taken whether the country succeeded and won the war or not is a different criteria than the criteria along which we decide is the country successful in its peaceful state. And that's exactly the problem. You don't only have to be more creative, build beautiful networks, be able to come up with incredible solutions, etc. you also have to be fearless and vicious at times. You also have to be brave. You also have to be strong. You also have to be capable of killing. And good faith development and good experience in killing, they don't necessarily go well hand in hand with each other. And we will have decades of post-trauma. We will have decades of healing inside the Ukrainian society. It's not going to be easy. And I'm afraid that I would have to contradict you and say, no, we probably don't understand what it means to be on the front line because we're not there. And I think that people who go through that have very, very, very different words that they would use to describe what they are going through. And this is, I think, important from the Western perspective as well, because the European countries that mostly did not pay for its own security for 3 generations are intoxicated with false sense of security. And we are now facing the consequences of this false sense of security.
Thank you, Yevhen, for these moving words. Rebecca, you are a person who is maybe an incarnation of the rule, there is nothing worse than to be right too early before your right words are not turned to mainstream. And you as a person, I remember you for years, like pointing out the danger of the Russian aggression, pointing out the danger of the Russian imperialism, and pointing out the necessity for the West to support Ukraine and to integrate Ukraine more in the Western security and economic and other structures. What would be, and the reality has proven that you were right, what would be, from your perspective now, the task of the West? It should not be probably like lecturing the Ukrainians how to deal with the challenges of the peace building after the war.
Oh, a huge question also. I would like to start with a remark on the title of our panel, because so this issue, how to win peace, not war, for me, the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. So from my point of view, it will be very, very difficult. It would be very difficult to win peace if you can't win the war. So first you have to win the war, and then you can win the peace. Maybe, and it depends on the development of the war, you will be able in Ukraine, together with others, to start to prepare to win the peace or win back the peace for the country while you have the war. But I think there is a huge tension in between these two ideas. And for the West, so meaning the group of countries which seem now to be the friends of Ukraine, the supporters of Ukraine, they present themselves as more and more doubtless about the needs to support Ukraine. Those countries will play a major role whether Ukraine can win the war or not. And so for me it was an awful year and 5 months since last February, following that before each and every delivery of each and every weapon system, the countries, especially mine, discussed whether delivering these weapons or a special system for air defense would make them a party to the war. So there was acknowledgement of Ukraine needs weapons, but the defining factor whether to deliver or not was often how can we avoid to become a party of this war. And from my point of view, this part of the debate in Germany or in other Western countries, this part of the debate shows until today that the friends of Ukraine, the group of supporters of Ukraine in the West, is not yet clearly decided that Ukraine really must win this war. We will see how it goes on, but for example, the interview, it was not a unique interview which Kissinger gave to The Economist. He had also a big interview in Germany in Die Zeit. And in this interview, he also, from my point of view, outlined again all the mistakes which have been committed in the perception of what's going on in Russia and over the last decades. And he was part of this, by the way. From my point of view, Kissinger was also part of the mistakes made, and he shows little appetite, being 100 years old, to think about really deeply about the own mistakes. But what I want to say with hinting on Kissinger and others is, if you do not recognize in the West Russia until today, you can also not agree that Russia must be defeated. And you do not get the balance right. You mentioned in the very beginning of your introduction that we had in Germany this never again period. So in Germany we had never again war, and we had never again fascism. From my point of view, we now recognize, if we want to win this war, we need the war to have really fascism out of Europe. And that's also something what in the West is not easy to discuss. It's still kind of, I don't know what it is, but people want to feel safe, yeah, and avoid to discuss in the true dimension what is going on in Ukraine and what is going on in Russia. And the Sustainable Peace Manifesto, and that's something what I think we have to take care about together. The Sustainable Peace Manifesto is a paper which goes through all the different chapters which we have to discuss about how to win the war and how to win a lasting peace. There will be many, many countries and groups in our countries which will not like to discuss it, but that you tabled it and that you did not shy away to mention internationally conflicts and also national conflicts in this, on this way, how to win war and how to win afterwards peace, is a very, very good precondition for this very necessary discussion.
Thank you, Rebecca. That is indeed a very broad discussion and a huge task. But before I ask my next question to Pavlo Klimkin, if you are observing our discussion via Facebook translation, don't hesitate to put your questions into the commentary section. We will be able to read them, and your questions most probably will be asked to the group. So don't hesitate to write the question if you want to ask something. Even if you have questions right now, do it right now. Pavlo Klimkin, you have been an ambassador of before you were a foreign minister of Ukraine. You've been an ambassador in Berlin, and as we all know, Berlin is not the easiest post for any Ukrainian diplomat. A lot of interest groups and important European countries still back then, before 2014, it was not a country that was ready to go into confrontation with Russia in order to support Ukraine. Now it looks to have changed. But with your experience as a diplomat on a high level on Ministry of Foreign Affairs or a diplomat to a G7 member state, what will be the tasks for Ukraine to create or co-create a sustainable international diplomatic solution for the future peace? What mechanisms could be addressed to help Ukraine to go into peace with fewer costs and with more success?
Well, it's not just a set of challenges for Germany, but for the West as such, Germany is, of course, special because of its history, because of its positioning. The fundamental problem with Germany, for me, is that Germany mainly, as an underlying mentality, is about managing, not about leadership. There are, of course, other examples, but the former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt famously said, if you have vision, just go to a doctor. The Germans love different plans, elaborated, all kind of good plans, like Rebecca just said, with all kind of insurances. It's getting really at the back of their mind. Secondly, it's about understanding what next. And in order to win, you have to enter the fight. Otherwise, it's just, But if you enter the fight, it's about costs, it's about risks. If you don't like neither cost, neither risks, so basically you are nowhere. And just a point about German mentality. Every second weeks, as you know, they have either in the foreign ministry, the Auswärtige Amt, or somewhere else, a kind of meeting with a lot of Russians from whatever angle of Europe. Some people, considered as good Russians, some probably less, and always they call and say, Pavlo, we need you to join somehow. And I said, what is the point? And once they asked me, and at the end of the day, if we don't talk to good Russians, how can we manage Russia? How can we have a sort of managed reality in Russia? And I said, look, guys, don't talk to good guys. Talk to bad guys. And it was so mind-blowing. They said, Pavlo, again, you with your ideas, but it's bad guys. How can we talk to bad guys? I said, look, it's not about sort of friendly chat. But you talk to a lot of bad guys in the world, and unfortunately, there is a balance of good guys and bad guys in this world. In order to be safe, you need to be ready for a fight if needed. You need to develop capabilities for that, and Germany does not have this capability at the moment. Whether it's military, whether it's hybrid, whether it's in the sense of social resilience. Actually, it's also for true for other countries. But the French and the Brits, they have different strategic culture. And the simple point that the Germans now are unable for 5 or so months, correct me, Rebecca, because it should be presented at the Munich Security Conference, can't release a simple draft or at least a final draft of the security strategy. It's now discussed, and it's about 2 issues. Very simple. One is China, and the next one is Russia. Everything else is crystal clear. So fundamentally, if you can't, at this very level, at the kind of vague level of your thinking, to define for yourself at least the outline towards Russia and China, how can you enter a real fight? And on the top of that, what I hear, what you've mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, it's mind-blowing. It's in Germany, but also in France. Basically, the point Yevhen has mentioned. Look, you're Ukrainians, you are good guys. Okay, we adore you, yeah? But you have this binary mentality. This binary mentality is about winning or losing, so it's difficult. It's not European mentality, my point. Why it's not European mentality? You have so many examples in the European history about this binary mentality, and it was successful, and other kind of mentality, they said, yeah, you're right. But now, and again, it's this insurance mentality, and it's my last point. Either Europe is ready, and I don't believe in a kind of evolutionary approach here, to fundamentally raise the stakes and to say, guys, we need a kind of double-edged leadership within the Western world. We need Europe, and we need US. And last example about F-16, it's here mind-blowing, because it's what is partly Europe leading. Not because Europe wanted to lead, but because Europe has a fundamental fear about oncoming changes in the US. And it's again insurance strategy. But I would love Europe to raise the stakes, even following this insurance strategy. And if it's the case, we are fundamentally nowhere, and we would have fragmentation of Europe. And I hate to have fragmentation of Europe, because the solidarity of Europe is the fundamental point how we feel strong and we feel safe. But Germany, for me now, and sorry, I love this country, you know it, I spent quite a time. Germany, for me, is still half, part of the problem, half part of the solution, and probably even more still part of the problem. And we need Germany as part of the solution.
To address one of the points you have mentioned in your analysis, what should be, from your perspective, Ukraine's policy towards China? Should Ukraine actively be involved in the European-Chinese relations? Should Ukraine stay aware? Should Ukraine welcome Chinese investments or not?
We are about becoming part of the West. Now we are part of the West, not formally, of course, but we are about to become part of the European Union, NATO, not today, but in the future. And we have to follow the set of Western policies towards China. Of course, we have our maneuver. Of course, we have our choices. And China is keenly interested, what I see from my Chinese connection, to have an understanding how China can play the European security architecture, can play it up, not play it down. But of course, we have our maneuver of economy, we have our maneuver on kind of cultural contacts, but on security, if the European Union gonna follow de-risking strategy, it's gonna be de-risking strategy for Ukraine. There is no way out of it. Of course, we can implement it in a creative way, and creativity is quite wide open here. But fundamentally, being part of the West, we can't afford, I keenly hope, you asked me at the beginning that we're not going to become kind of Hungarian reality, part of this reality, part of that reality, and part of that reality. If we have such country as Ukraine, part of different realities, the West going to get fragmented, and it's going to be the end of the West. And it's not pathetic here.
Thank you. Rebecca, you have spent a lot of time in Brussels at the European Parliament. You know Brussels maybe best than ever in this room. What are the chances of Ukraine to be a member of the European Union in the foreseeable future? What should be done from what side?
So, first of all, for Ukraine, it was a major step that Kyiv, together with the European Commission's president, dared to ask a candidate status last year. So that came for most of the EU states unexpected, and that it was decided was also nearly until the last moment unexpected. So what happened is what Kissinger would probably find wrong. Yeah? Finally, after more than 10 years, keeping the doors closed for Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova, the doors have been opened. So That's a huge step. How we are going to deal with the process which comes after, it's very, very difficult to decide. Also for me, knowing all the procedures. And what I would wish would be that Ukrainians do not get the same way or the same patterns of negotiation process as we had it with the Western Balkans or with Turkey. So we have together to think about the best way under the given circumstances to use the openness which had been achieved by a huge and courageous political move between von der Leyen and President Zelensky. But it's really also knowing Brussels, it's not easy to say what is the best way. The only thing what I dare to say is you can make it. Ukraine has a lot of experiences, meanwhile, with its institutions. What will be necessary? So Ukraine has already a huge knowledge of the European acquis and the European standards, etc. It's feasible. But when and what shall be put on the table and is realistic to be negotiated until the very end, this has to be carefully decided from my point of view.
Can sustainable peace be reached without EU membership of Ukraine?
For the peace issue and the war issue, I would say NATO membership is by far more important and should happen as soon as possible. In this, I'm fully against Kissinger. I think he's really in the risk to repeat or prolong with this interview he gave old patterns of mistakes towards Russia. European Union is a process because I know the acquis, which gets heavier and heavier every year, and as long as the fulfillment of the acquis is the precondition, I would start to think about a stepwise and more cautious process. But NATO for peace and for security is what Ukraine needs as soon as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Yevhen, I remember many talks we had during the last 9 years, and many of them were about what are the urgent needs of the Ukrainians. And I remember how starting from 15, 16, you repeatedly told Ukrainians need and strive for security, for feeling of security, and feeling of security provides the Ukrainians with the understanding they can create something, they can stay, they can invest, etc., etc. I think that actually the discussion which we have observed the last days, those who are in the Facebook bubble have seen it definitely about the separate wagons in Ukrainian trains, like for women and for male. It is also the reflection of this urgent need for security, because you cannot be safe, you cannot do anything if your personal body security and safety is not guaranteed. What will be, from your perspective, the ways to guarantee the Ukrainians with security? What will bring people from abroad back to Ukraine? What will bring them back to the liberated territories of eastern and southern Ukraine?
Well, it's to rephrase the slogan that was in Bill Clinton's, I believe, campaign headquarters. It said back then, it's the economy stupid. I'm saying it's the security stupid. I divide security into two categories. One is national security, and this is where we need NATO. And if we end up with any substitute of NATO, we are being fooled. And we have to explain in strongest terms that there is no way that Ukraine can be outside of NATO and we have sustainable peace.
If I may interrupt you on this place, those people in the West who offer Ukraine with substitutes of the NATO, don't they understand the severity, or do they want to fool the Ukrainians?
Well, it's a good question. I remember one of the senior German politicians at the conference saying, like, we lost the war with Russia, no big deal. You know, you have incredibly rude approaches in many countries. I hear that in the United States. I hear that in France. I hear that in Austria. I hear that in Germany. I hear that even in some countries where I would not have thought that I would be able to hear anything like that. Yes, most of that is kind of off records, and you know, you're being patted on the shoulder, you know, at the same time, and it's kind of in a friendly, spoken in softly in friendly terms. But in fact, this is, I think it's a continuation of the old colonial view. I see it at this point, particularly in the United States, where the assumption of many people who are the key decision makers vis-a-vis Ukrainian security or security assistance or NATO membership is that Russia is permanent and Ukraine, we're not sure. Whereas from the Ukrainian perspective, we understand that Ukraine is a constant here, but we're not sure about this particular Russian statehood, because this particular Russian statehood should fail, and it's better for everyone, including the Russians, if it fails. So this is important. But then the next thing is, and this is something that you're talking about, the female compartments in the Ukrainian railroad, and you know, many other things that, for instance, one of the reasons why a lot of Ukrainian politicians keep on insisting to be re-elected and stay in the game is because they're afraid that they will lose their security once they're out of the game. And this is exactly the issue of personal security, or this is the issue of human security. No one feels safe in a former Soviet Union as long as we play along the Russian imperial rules, Russian colonial rules. Human security is also important. Human security is not easy to comprehend if you look at Ukraine from the outside. And this is exactly where I think, and this is, I think, the right audience where I can't stress that too much. The embassies, we need you in Ukraine. The newspapers, the radio stations, the TV stations, we need your people to be in Ukraine permanently. You know, the think tanks, we need your people to be in Kyiv, not in Warsaw. And what we're seeing is that a lot of the people who could have been in Kyiv at this point, in Kharkiv, in other cities, are contractually forbidden to cross the Ukrainian border. And this is terrible. Now, the last part is European integration. And this is, I think this is the supplemental part of our agenda. Our vital agenda, existential agenda, is about security. European Union is on top of that. You know, if we succeed with security, then we can think about our future, then, you know, European Union might be a good idea. And here, with the European Union, it's also important to understand that the goal is not to have Ukraine in the club. The goal is for the club and Ukraine both together to be successful if that will happen. Because if we get Ukraine in the club, and then Ukraine becomes another Hungary, that's a failure for everyone. If we get Ukraine in the club, and Ukraine along the way has to make concessions that will make it utterly unhappy and unsuccessful, then it's not a good case. In that sense, I actually, I'm very cautious about the Ukrainian government trying to speed things up. I think it's very important that we don't make the velocity of entry a criteria. I think it's incredibly important that we make the success of entry a criteria, and that means that can take 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but it should be a process. It should be a process which basically allows a two-way street between Kyiv and Brussels to talk to each other until the point of getting mutual understanding, which I think we have in deficit at the moment.
Thank you. Rebecca, you wanted to comment.
What I'm convinced about is that the European Union has to change. And I'm not talking about the reforms, majority voting or something what Chancellor Scholz and others put into the center of the reforms. But the entry of Ukraine will rebalance also the internal powers and the internal priorities of the European Union. And it's still a long way also for the West of the European Union to accept this. But if it's happening, it will guarantee a much more robust and sustainable union than it is today. Because today, after Brexit and with the visible splits in the European Union, how to react to Russia, the future of the European Union is not really 100% guaranteed, at least not as it is now. Yeah? So therefore, the openness for Ukraine is not only to accept Ukraine, but to be open for real change of the European Union.
I think that is like a very essential topic, because like having Ukraine within the EU means that the Ukrainians will have a very solid rights for voting within the EU, appointing their EU commissioners, having their share in the EU Parliament, and with the population of Ukraine, it will be a pretty large share. I personally think that for many politicians in Germany, there is a fear that the EU will get like something that they call like a second Poland, not even a second Hungary, but second Poland, as a rival of Germany, at least in German eyes. So yes, it is important to have Ukraine in the EU. It is an asset for the EU. But first, we need to convince those who are afraid of that, because they are very short-sighted.
I think this will bring us to again closer to Lviv Media Forum. I am also a member of the supervisory board of the public service broadcast, and Ukrainian public service broadcast is the party that was supposed to host the Eurovision contest this year, and we know that Ukraine could not host the Eurovision contest, so it was in Britain, which I just want to say that it was excellently held. It was a spectacular show. But there were voices in the European Broadcasting Union that we have to think about changing the rules, because there are so many Ukrainian migrants now in the EU that Ukraine will always be winning the Eurovision. And the response, at least this is what was kind of half jokingly communicated inside, was that the response from the Ukrainian side was that, weren't we told that you can't change the rules along during the game? Wasn't that the main theme of the European partners? And I think we saw that the Eurovision contest was not won by Ukraine. So I think a lot of the fears that many sides have about what's going to happen if Ukraine joins the EU and then goes together with Poland and they establish some kind of new center of gravity. I think there's a lot of uncertainty there. We don't know where Ukraine will be. I've been following Ukrainian-Polish relations for many years. There are a lot of issues there. Let's not try to oversimplify things, because they are in process. On the other hand, I think there is a lot of homework that should be done, which we are not doing. If we imagine that Ukraine joins the EU now, Ukrainian voters would participate in 2029 elections. And then I ask a simple question. Do we sincerely understand the difference between Council of Europe, European Council, and Council of the European Union.
Oh, I'm afraid 99% of Germans don't understand it.
Yeah, this is a killer question, you know. So we have to take time and educate our public about the particulars, about the procedures, about the mechanisms of the European Union. We have to prepare the public debate to be able to have it in rational terms. Otherwise, it's going to be a conflict of political strategies, of political technologies, and this is a terrible idea.
Yeah, thank you, Yevhen. Regarding the number of Ukrainian displaced persons in the EU members, you don't need to have Ukrainian displaced persons to vote. I personally sent 20 paid SMS to a German provider, unfortunately in vain, but it was everything I could do. It is right time to ask questions. I see, yes, the lady, the gentleman, and one, two, yes, first you and then you, please. And please name yourself and say to whom you want to address your question. And if you are watching the discussion online, you may also write your question in the commentary section.
Yeah, hello, my name is Yulia. I'm not sure to whom to address, so to all three speakers. From what I heard and from what you said and from history, we kind of know that the peace in one place is often supported by the war in another place, right? We had a Cold War, which was not that cold in Afghanistan or Cambodia or Vietnam. We have a price for counterterrorism measures in Europe, paid in Iraq and Syria. So now Ukraine is kind of the price for absence of bombing of Vilnius or Helsinki. So my question is, would it mean that, given this logic, right, would it mean that the price for peace in Ukraine would be the war in Russia? And what would be the impact of that on the peace in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. And for whom was your question, or it was like to the round? Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'm quite skeptical. I have to be optimistic here. As a Ukrainian, Golda Meir, born in Kyiv, once said to be a Zionist and not to be an optimist is a don't-go of the same to be Ukrainian and not to be optimist. But I'm quite skeptical about using rational arguments here, because there is a mantra, not just of security policy, but like Rebecca has just said, it's going deep at the level of how people identify themselves. And this mantra is to avoid, under any cost, at least for now, a direct conflict between nuclear powers. We live emotionally in a sort of bubble. It's a fundamentally different with an open nerve, and we see it as a real drive to have a victory in our sense. The West, of course, also would love to have a victory, but this victory has quite different definition. It's about manageable victory. It's about victory in time, but it's also about their security. And discussing the security model for Ukraine, I believe it's wrong to use the point about our security for the future. Again, I'm really cynical here, but it's not gonna get the target. But my point is fundamentally different. Talking about our security, you are basically talking about your security. If we don't have sustainable reality in the future, if we are unable to control the future European security architecture, we're gonna come not to a sort of Korean reality like it's discussed in our media. Korean reality is something fundamentally different. You have a line, you have boots on the ground from one side, in this case Chinese, you have boots on the ground from the other side, it's the Americans and USSR support. Actually, if we stop short whether or NATO membership, or at least boots on the ground, not to fight Russia, but real boots on the ground on our territory, it's gonna be quite similar, not to a sort of Korean reality, but if you remember Kashmir is exactly the reality. And in some moment in time, India got nuclear. In some moment in time, Pakistan got nuclear. Now we live in the 21st century. So my point to our friends is crazy simple. Look, guys, it's not about our security. Whether you're gonna care about our security till the end of your days in the way of fighting for us, you are not ready for that. But just start fighting about your security. Because I have a sort of gut feeling that this model gonna be blown off. And in some moment in time, we have a completely different sense of conflict. Now we have conventional war against Russia. Of course, with all kind of different new armaments, drones, intel, all kind of stuff. But in the future, we're gonna fight WMD and hybrid. And it's gonna destroy pretty much everyone. So my point is about your security and why NATO is so crucial. And why the traditional point to NATO is so crucial. Let's be sustainable and extremely clear in every point on our security and your security. And on the top of that, the point about war on Russia, it's about stakes. It's about different understanding of what is at stake. And Russia is different. The problem for Russia is not just Putin. Putin is just the top of the iceberg. The problem for Russia is Russians. And the mentality which is dominating Russia, you know, this crazy DNA which lacks empathy, which lacks normal set of values, for whatever reason. And some of my friends, Western friends saying, look, Pavlo, in some moment in time, let's take Putin out of this equation. And after that, it's all about crazy propaganda, and the Russians will become kind of better guys in 2 years, in 4 years. It's all crazy. So fundamentally, we need to argue about that. So guys, it's about your security. It's about our security. And either we go together in a safer world, or like in the famous joke, we're gonna got hang or got down together. It's a very simple choice. There is no choice in between. And if you believe there is a choice in between, you are nowhere.
Oh, thank you. I loved very much like your point on your take on what is the real problem for Russia, like Putin or the Russian mentality and way of thinking. Putin is a real, exactly, like how much Russia is in Putin. How much Russia is formed by Putin, but how much Putin is a reflection of Russia. We still have one question promised, and this will be unfortunately the last question because we're heading, or maybe for our happiness, because we're heading towards the dinner. So please ask your question, say your name and to whom you address your question.
Okay, so my name is Artur. I'm from Latvia. I'm political science by a degree and journalist by my job. First of all, very much thank you for the discussion. It was amazing. Second of all, my question / commentary mostly directed to Yevgeny, and especially what he said about the European Union. My question commentary is, why do you think that the European Union does not provide the security enough? For instance, if you ask any Latvian, more or less, they will say to you that by providing a lot of possibilities, especially in terms of economics, Latvia also became secure by that. And not at any point I would disregard NATO's part in this equation, don't get me wrong. But on the other hand, what the European Union provides is a set of values, a really good guideline when it comes to amending your laws and economy. All of these things, without any doubt, create your state a secure place. So what would you comment on this? Thank you very much.
Acha?
I think it's going to be a short one. I don't know. Yeah, it works. I think it's going to be a short one. There is a tremendous difference between the conditions of Latvian entry into the EU and Ukrainian entry into the EU. And the difference is about the limbo, the time in between. Ukraine has been configured during this time of uncertainty. Ukraine has its own formed, or I would even say fully formed capital scene. It's not a lot of capital, but those owner of capital are willing to go to great lengths to protect their interests. And that was not the case when Central European countries or the Baltics were entering the EU. We have a different set of actors. It's a different scene. The size is also different, the market size, if you wish. I think it's also about the fact that you don't necessarily have to be part of the EU to play by the EU rules. If you look at Norway or Switzerland, for different reasons, they opted to stay out. But they basically adhere to most of the EU regulations. It's just that they don't participate in voting. I can envision conditions under which Ukraine will decide similarly. I can envision conditions under which Ukraine would decide to go full-fledged into the EU. But I think it's a very different case between Latvia and Ukraine. I think this is also a great moment to say huge thank you to Latvia for all the support that Ukraine got. It's very impressive. Thank you, guys. Kudos to you and your government.
Thank you. Thank you, Yevhen, for this great statement. You have stolen a part of my job, but I will not share my honorary with you. That is amazing what we had today in this meeting. Thank you very much for your participation. What I need to add here at the point that at 19 it was planned, so now we have like 1990. We have our dinner with 20 minutes delay, but it is still waiting for us, and it is actually amazing to see that the audience is so full despite the food is already served. That is the sign of very high quality discussion and speakers. Thank you, Pavlo Klimkin, Yevhen Hlibovytskyi, Rebecca Harms. Of course, thank you, organizers, Lviv Media Forum. Thank you very much. You have organized amazing event. This is only the first day. We will have like 2 days, tomorrow and after tomorrow. Thank you, volunteers, for helping us and for providing secure feeling for this event. And thank you, translators. An important thing for tomorrow, the buses will await for you.